So guys, let's get started. My name is Malovicho. I'm currently working as a Senior Director of Engineering at Carbon6. I have a little bit more than 10 years of engineering experience. I originally started as a Java developer. And slowly I moved into the executive levels. For the last 4 years, I've been holding executive positions, which means I've interacted a lot with the business, with the stakeholders, and of course, a lot of developer teams, lots of projects. And basically my primary goal would be to to be a communicator in between the business needs and the software engineers, and basically how to run engineering teams efficiently. I started my career at the biggest bank of Ukraine. That was 10 years ago. And then I moved into my first startup. It was at the very, very beginning stages. So essentially, I took the application from the drawing board into production with around 10 millions ARR. And I just recently moved for a new challenge to Carbon6. And yeah, thanks, Adam, and everybody. Glad to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about ChatGPT. So here's today's agenda. We're going to start with briefly describing what ChatGPT or GPT model is. We're really going to cover some very, very basics, because to understand what it is and how it interacts, how it's built on top of the transformer architecture, it deserves its own presentation. We mostly will be talking today about prompts. I want to share with you guys my prompt philosophy. I want to showcase a few prompts, like real life examples that I use with my engineers. And at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the prompt engineering example. This needs to be this meant to be a very practical presentation to kind of like give you a mindset of like how this technology can be used to boost up the productivity of an engineer. And mostly we will be showing the examples. So we're not going to cover GPT plugins. We're not going to cover transformer architecture, nothing fancy. We're gonna do very basics there, and then we're gonna move to the prompts. So let's get started. When it all happened, I believe, in 2018, when the transformer architecture has been introduced first, and GPT is actually the most successful, in my opinion, implementation of the transformer-based large language model. The revolution happened around March or April this year when they released GPT-4. There are actually more than one GPT-4 models right now that are available through the API, but we mostly will be focusing on GPT-4. All this stuff from this summary table can be found on the internet. We pretty much all know, whoever's using ChatGPT, that it has a little bit more than 8,000 input tokens, which is basically defines the length of the input that you could feed it to. The training data size is absolutely huge. I believe it was trained on around 65 petabytes of data, and it has more than 1 trillion parameter. The size, the model size, or the parameter size actually defines how efficient the model can operate its training data. So let's cover in really base terminology here. We're not going into deep dive of the architecture. It's basically just for the average layman to understand what it's doing. Essentially, if we simplify this quite a bit, we're gonna see that essentially what GPT-4 is, or any GPT, I will be just referring GPT or GPT-4 or an agent, but I mean the same thing, really. So what it does, it essentially predicts a next word probability based on the user input. So let's look at the example. If we supply a simple sentence, I am, and we give some context, what we kind of want to complete, essentially all it's doing, it first does some technical parts, like, for example, it's translating the input string into the set of digits. Generative models don't work with English text. They work with digital tokens, which are basically a bunch of digits. And essentially all it's doing, you feed this set of tokens into the model, and all model does is producing the probability distribution of the next word that is likely to occur given on the given vocabulary. And vocabulary is essentially a data set it was trained on. It also adds a little bit of randomness on top of that. There are many layers. Again, we're oversimplifying this example. And it's not, if we're gonna be precise, it doesn't even predict the next word. It just predicts the next token. But just for the simplicity's sake, let's say it's a word. So we give original input string which says I am. It gives the probability distribution. It picks one of the words. Let's say the next one is I am happy. And basically it iterates over the same process again and again. It could be hundreds of iterations, and until essentially the desired result is produced. So that's kind of like in a very simplified terms of what it's doing. And now let's talk about the what to expect, right? Basically, what to expect. And again, I'm talking about all this from the user perspective. I'm not talking about if you looking to dive into the transformer architecture, or you looking to fine tune some large model, or like train it on custom data. We're not going to be covering all that. We will purely be looking at that from the user perspective. How can I use ChatGPT? So basically, the very important thing to understand here is that since it's a probability distribution, you're gonna see, based on your input, you're gonna see the output that looks right, but is not necessarily right. And essentially, right now, you need, if you understand that, you basically need to bring your domain knowledge to the table. And now you work with ChatGPT in conjunction, where you, being a domain expert, if we're talking about software engineering, you should be able to understand produced code. Does it fit to the system? Does it have all the right parameters and stuff like that? And you, by having your domain expertise and assessing the answer that really looks right, you should be able to determine if it's actually correct. So basically, based on this, we could deduct that essentially the right result should be based on the right input. So it's all about the prompt design and how you're designing your prompt. That's the first stepping stone that we need to grasp in order to take full advantage of GPT-4. So basically, since we're looking at all that from non-ML users' perspective, we start with prompt design. Prompt design is essentially carefully crafted input string with the goal or whatever you want to be as an outcome. There's another kind of field that is called prompt programming or prompt engineering. It's essentially the same thing as prompt design, except for a few things on top of that. You usually can format the response of the output in a right way. You connect the vector database, and here you go. Now you are in the AGI industry, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. And since GPT-4 release, this industry is quite booming. We're going to briefly touch on that at the end, but right now let's focus on the prompt design techniques. And I want to start with giving you my philosophy of the prompt design. How do you know if you crafted the right prompt, if your prompt is correct or it's good enough, right? You never know. It's hard, right? You write down a couple of sentences, you usually in rush, you want to get the output as quick as you can, and you usually fire whatever you have there, spend a couple of minutes, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get the right result or expected result. So my idea was, why can't we use something that I called prompt creator template? You can see it on your right. If you will fire this template, essentially, what I'm looking for here is I'm trying to turn my GPT agent into a little Socrates. If you guys remember, Socrates was a guy who never gave any answers. It was just asking questions from his students, prompting them to think into the right direction and to think and arrive to the solutions themselves. So, but by using this template, I'm turning my GPT agent into little Socrates that is able to give me suggestions on my prompts, give me questions about my prompts, and most importantly, I'm not going to rewrite the prompt myself. I want this agent to rewrite this for me. right? So essentially, I start working with GPT when I have a complex prompt. I start with firing this prompt creator template. Then I give my initial input. And then basically based on the suggestions and questions, I just gotta pick a number that I like or give my comments. It always gonna prompt you to more ideas how to revise your prompt. And then at the end, GPT-4 actually regenerates the entire prompt for you, given into account, taking into account the suggestions and questions. So, and basically the workflow is you start with this prompt creator template, you fire it, you get back, and you iterate like that 3 to 5 times. Usually I find this more than enough to construct a good prompt, and then you fire the prompt. So that's kind of an approach here. So I want to move to a practical example here. So I want to build this system. I have an application server that runs PHP Laravel application. And there are some critical events in the application. When they happen, I actually want to notify a certain group of people in an asynchronous way that something has happened in a system. And that something happening in a system does not necessarily mean it's a monitoring template. So I don't want to use any monitoring agent. It's strictly related to the business logic of my application. So what I want to do when this event happens, I want to catch it with my service. I want to send a message to a simple queue service on AWS. I want to create a Lambda function that will be listening for that queue. It will be reading a payload, and it will be fire a message to Slack to a group of people who are interested in that. So that's actually the funnest part, right? For me, I want to architect the system, but I don't want to write this code. And moreover, I also have a problem if I give this task to a developer or to a team of developers. In order to write all of these components of the system, they actually need to know AWS security policies. They need to know how to create a queue. They need to know the language that they're going to use the runtime for the Lambda function and so on. So there is a potentially a pitfalls with the learning curve for the developers. So why can't we just automate this task into something like this? So on the top, you can see my original prompt with one that I started. All the prompts that you guys will be seeing on this presentation, they were generated with the help of the prompt creator template. So I fired this template and I received the revised version. Literally in 3-4 iteration, it became this. I underscored certain important parts that were added. As you can see, now it's way richer with the details. It defines a function, it defines a PHP library that needs to be used for interacting with SQS. It also defines that beside creating a queue, I also need security policies, and the same for the Lambda function. Oh, by the way, I actually need to designate the runtime for Lambda function. So the code that is produced is actually going to start working immediately. So as a result of this, we spent about 20 to 30 minutes crafting the prompt and revising the prompt. Then it produced about 250 lines of fully working code. I almost didn't change a thing. And we spent an hour testing that and another half an hour deploying that. 2 hours in, the system is fully implemented, it's safe, and it's in production. So the next showcase, yeah, guys, sorry, it's going to be a lot of small text, but I want you to pay attention and kind of like I want to set up your mindset so you know like the important points, well, that I believe are important for your prompts, right? So let's say we want to run an interview in a company. A lot of companies are doing coding challenge that are online, right? So my problem is, how do I get these assignments, right? Well, of course, you could buy a paid subscription, but why bother? Can I actually leverage GPT-4 into doing this for me? So in this prompt, essentially, there are a few important parts. Well, first of all, I list all the 5 items that I expect to receive back, right? I want description with example. I want the proposed function signature. I want to have some unit tests so we could actually run solution online with the candidate. And I want reference implementation because I don't know how it should work, right? Well, I can find out, but I want to save as much time as I can. And I wanted to produce space and time complexity the best possible for this problem. There are a few important parts here. One part is being your response. As you can see, I'm referring to the section, your response. And if you look at that section, it actually defines a contract between me and the agent based on what we need to continue communicating. So you should start by asking me what complexity level I want for the task, easy, medium, or hard. Depending on my response, you should generate an answer with 5 items. And after you answer me with all them, you need to ask me what is the complexity. And the second most important part here is I'm giving an example. GPT loves examples. So when you expect something more or less specific, like in this case, there was something very, very specific that I was expecting back, I'm supplying this example so it could actually, I'm setting my expectations. So if you fire this template, it's going to kick GPT agent into a mode. And in that mode, it's not going to just keep operating as it usually do, just Q&A kind of session. You kick it into a state where all you have to do is just continue typing easy, medium, or hard, and it's going to keep producing the tasks for you. Now, you can take it to the next level if you want. You could recraft your response section, and in that section, you could actually provide, for example, some structure by defining a JSON response file that you want to get. For example, we're using coderpath.io at Carbon6 for coding interviews. You could hook up your little app that just pings the OpenAI API, gets their JSON response back, and leverage coderpath.io API to create these pods. So by putting some simple interface, you could click a button and new pods with the medium, easy, or hard assignments will be generated automatically and, well, almost for free. We're not going to count the GPT-4 token usage. But that's more on the prompt engineering side of things, which we're going to touch a little bit on later. So the next showcase is we had to actually implement the integration with the CRM with one of our applications. So what is the problem? I'm sure every one of you guys use the CRM. The most prominent one probably would be the Salesforce. We're using NetSuite CRM at Carbon6. So we had to create an integration between one of the projects and the CRM. So what is the problem number one here? Problem number one here is a domain knowledge, right? How can you give a task to engineers so they could actually execute it efficiently? I don't want them spend days and days reading documentation and finding out what is the difference between lead, sale, address, transactional data, non-transactional data in the CRM. But instead, I craft this prompt. And there are two important parts, actually three. One is, again, your response, similar to the last one. I'm establishing a contract between you and agent. And there is a self prompt, because ChatGPT tends sometimes to forget the context. If you iterate long enough, if you run like 30 prompts, it may forget. So self prompt, I notice, helping a lot to not lose the context. And essentially, I'm also emphasizing that I want this learning thing to be about SweetTalk API, which is just a fancy name for the NetSuite's API for leveraging the data. I gave the prompt to the engineers 2 hours in for each of them. They were almost an experts in the entire domain industry. They were able to determine what's what, and moreover, how to use it by leveraging the API. So the first problem solved. Now the problem number two, we actually now need to integrate this into our application. So, with every feature and every integration, there are two parts. There is a fun part and there is a boring part. The boring part mostly starts when you need to actually craft some boilerplate code. So, for example, you need to produce some UI files. If you're using Vue.js, that would be some set of components. You need to generate the REST services. You need to generate data access objects. You need to generate database migration. So this is all boring part. And I don't want to do boring part. I want to do fun part. And the fun part is being writing a business logic, do what the business wants, because that is the value, right? Boilerplate, no one cares how you formatted your HTML file. The real value is the features that would bring something to the user, right? So we crafted this prompt, and essentially few important things here. First, I'm giving an identity to the GPT agent by saying, hey, you are my senior software engineer, and I'm your team leader, and you need to propose a solution for the system. There is a task details where I designate in 5 steps exactly what I want to build. There is basically some mapping. We try to synchronize the data, some portions of data in between one application and the CRM, right? So there's got to be a UI and the REST service that will allow this mapping to happen. So I have the task details. I also supply technology stack because I want this all the output be relevant to my tech stack that I'm using in that particular app. I also added self reminder and self prompt, which is also important because you're not gonna get the entire system back because ChatGPT may get confused on the way and may forget what it was doing. And I also supplied the main model, which is literally just a couple of PHP classes. And this is I simplified these domain models just for this presentation. But essentially, if you fire this prompt, it's gonna kick GPT-4 into a specific state when it actually becomes your advisor and it starts doing all things one by one. So it will start with first, it will generate front end and REST services, and then it will ask, are you okay with that? Can I continue? And you saying yes or no, I want you to correct something. But if you're saying yes, please continue, it continues iterating and it remembers where it stopped. And it took basically around 15 iterations with me mostly saying yes, no, please correct. And this thing was able to generate the entire system for me. And it was essentially plug and play. I plugged it in, and all we had to do is just fill it up with the business logic, no more boring stuff. We eliminated the boilerplate by 90%. Well, we did not eliminate that, right? But I mean, we didn't have to write it ourselves, right? So that's the key part here. So I think that's about it about prompt design examples. I wanna, for the closing, I wanna briefly touch on the prompt engineering. So what is AGI? AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence. The concept is not new. It's very old concept in computer science. But the idea of AGI that is powered by OpenAI and vector database originally coming from Yohei Nakajima. I really hope I pronounced that right. It was a guy who came up with a diagram of how he sees the architecture of the AGI, of modern AGI. And he created his first implementation, which was Baby AGI. And there is another one that is called AutoGPT. That's the implementation with the most adoption. So essentially, what is the goal? What is it doing? Well, let's look under the hood. Let's grab AutoGPT as the implementation with the most adoptions at the moment. So what is going on? Why do we need AGI? Why ChatGPT is not enough? Well, ChatGPT is not gonna cut it because it's gonna usually require some user input and some user supervision. This thing is more intended to be independent and have like a minimum interactions with the user. So users start with crafting some high-level goals, putting it into the user interface. Then you have your Python application that grabs the input. You plug some commands into your Python code. For example, OpenAI cannot do a Google search, right? But you can plug certain commands. OpenAI cannot evaluate code for you, right? But you can plug a specific command, which is, think of it in a very basic level, like a big switch statement, right? So if I know what command to run, I can just drop the Google Search API library and I can perform my search using Google Search. But someone needs to drive that, and it doesn't have to be user. In this case, it should be OpenAI, right? So basically, the way it starts, user fires the high-level goals. The core application feeds those goals into the OpenAI API, gets the response back. The application is able to parse the response, And it gives also along with the prompt, it gives the list of pluggable command that actually can be executed as a result of that. So the core fires the prompt, it gets the response back from OpenAI, and it's able to see the command section and to leverage a particular command if it has to, and give the output back to OpenAI. And this way, the interaction continues, well, until it reaches the desired outcome, or what it thinks is desired outcome. And I want to show you also this prompt. This is literally a prompt that I captured from AutoGPT. On top of it, you can see that it has some system comment, you are my business advisor, and it has three simple goals: analyze top 3 competitors in the shoe industry in Toronto in 2022 and explain me their strengths. Number 2, can you find out more about their supply chain? Okay, yeah, that's very high level. I'm apparently starting a shoe business and I want to find out more, right? Well, how ChatGPT can help me if its knowledge base was cut out in September 2021, right? It doesn't know who performed the best the year after, right? And that's where the prompt engineering comes in handy. The two very important components of this prompt is, first one is commands. These are the list of flaggable commands that I mentioned before. It's essentially what your application can do. Command number 13 could be a Java compiler. I want to evaluate Java code and see if it compiles, right? It could be pretty much anything, or it could be a coder API that needs to send some code in and create my paths for my interview. It literally could be anything. I reduced the list of commands. They have way more than that. They have, I believe, right now around 30. And the second most important part here is the response format. And the response format is where real prompt engineering comes in handy. You can see there's nothing fancy in here. It's just a JSON that I give to ChatGPT. Well, it's not ChatGPT anymore. It's OpenAI API that leverages GPT-4 model. And I structure my format exactly the way I need it to be back, because I'm actually not going to read it as a human. I'm going to feed it to my program, and I'm going to look at that command clause. And now it's able, ChatGPT actually is able to tell me to search Google with this input stream. For example, find top 3 competitors in Toronto for 2022, right? And now I could do a search through my app, get the results, and feed them back into the ChatGPT. Well, sorry, again, it's not ChatGPT, just GPT-4 model. And that is essentially what AGI in a nutshell is about. And I think, yeah, and I think that's most of what I wanted to mention. Just to close this, I'm going to share the GitHub with all of the prompts I show. I really suggest you guys to look into that if you haven't already been doing something like this. This can boost your productivity through the roof. Developers are gonna see the effect of that for sure if you give it to them. And to really close this, I don't think AI is going to replace us, but I do think we need to continue working towards kind of collaboration with AI. Good comparison that I can come up with would be, if you remember, guys, when the software industry was just starting, people were programming on perfo cards and machine code, right? Well, now show me a person who is learning how to do perfo card programming. We don't do that anymore, right? Because we found that leveraging the high-level language can yield more value. The same, I believe, applies right now with ChatGPT. Leveraging ChatGPT, well, it doesn't have to be ChatGPT. It has to be some large language model. It could be BART or pretty much anything like that. But with this collaboration, it could serve as a great extension for you as a developer. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much, guys.